Good afternoon. I'm Cindy Hepfer, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee. Today I'm delighted to welcome you to a webinar presented by Regina Romano Reynolds. The webinar is entitled The ISSN and You Using ISSN SuperNumber in the Digital Environment. Regina is the ISSN Coordinator at the Library of Congress and Director of the U.S. ISSN Center. She is a frequent speaker at conferences and meetings worldwide, and she has published numerous articles about the ISSN serials and the future of bibliographic control. She is currently convener of the ISO working group that will revise ISO 8, 1977, the presentation of periodicals, and she is also a key member of NISO's working group on the presentation and identification of e-journals, better known as PIJ. In 1999, Regina was the recipient of the ALCTS Ulrich Serials Librarianship Award. If you have questions about ISSN for Regina, please type them into the question box on your screen at any time. Regina will respond to questions at the end of her presentation. Please note that today's session is being recorded and that you will receive an email message with a link to the recording and to Regina's PowerPoint slides shortly after the conclusion of the webinar. Now I'm going to turn this over to Regina, and there may be a slight delay during that turnover.
Hello everyone. I'm always delighted to talk about the ISSN. So I owe thanks to ALCTS for this opportunity. First today I'm going to provide an overview of what the ISSN is all about and give some brief basic information. And then I'll focus on different aspects of the ISSN and the digital environment, and we'll leave some time for questions at the end. Now I often tell audiences that if the ISSN did not exist, someone would have to invent it, because there's new needs for such an identifier that emerge continually as the digital environment emerges. But as a matter of fact, it was invented. And as this slide would suggest, it was launched indirectly by the launch of Sputnik, the Soviet satellite, in 1957. Which started the space age, which started the space race, and which pushed the U.S. into a mode of being greatly interested in science, technology, and the literature of science and technology. The U.S. created the Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA, or DARPA, in February '58 in response to this launch that indirectly led to, or more directly led to, the Internet. And the rise of all this science literature demonstrated the need for identifiers such as ISBN and ISSN, which emerged in the early 70s. Now, ISSN was not born as a supernumber. It was a relatively ordinary child, but it did display a precocious tendency that gave some evidence of its future superpowers. But as it grew up, and as the digital environment grew up, more and more uses and applications of the ISSN evolved. Until today, Mr. SuperNumber is looking forward to a future in the linked data environment. So, just like Clark Kent, ISSN SuperNumber is not always visible. Sometimes it's hidden behind a bland exterior, as in this example. This is the Library of Congress SFX application, Find It. It's powered behind the scenes by the open URL, which in fact has the hidden power of the ISSN behind it. Or take OCLC's SFX, or OCLC's XISSN service, a service that will allow you to input an ISSN and get a wonderful diagram of all the relationships. Well, behind the scenes of this service is also the linking power of the ISSN. So I'm going to just briefly run through some things to know about the ISSN, some basics. Certainly, it's about identification, and I often try to describe the ISSN to people who have never heard of it as the social security number of the serials world. And just as our social security numbers can ensure that our contributions, or ultimately our payments, go to the right Regina Reynolds in my case, and not to that Patsy Cline imitator who has my name and lives in Charlottesville, so for the ISSN, it can ensure that the particular Time magazine in question is really uniquely identified and linked to. Now, in the early days, ISSN was mostly about printing of this identifier on a printed resource, which is pretty much all we had in the 70s. And we can still see to this day that the United States Postal Service, based on a collaboration that began between the National Serials Data Program, which was the former name of the U.S. ISSN Center, that collaboration that began in 1978 to help the Postal Service keep track of their periodicals rate publications, it was the first required printing of the ISSN. If a publisher has one of those special rates they need and been assigned an ISSN, they need, by government regulation, to print that number. And we can see here on Library Resources and Technical Services that ISSN is printed along with the identification statement about periodicals rate postage being paid. But in the digital environment, uses of ISSN go well beyond being printed on a published issue. Certainly online access in large databases for even something as check-in. We still have print periodicals, certainly here at the Library of Congress. And if a print periodical that's mostly in Chinese characters, Thai characters, comes in, but it's printing the ISSN, the check-in staff can use that ISSN to access the record and check it in. ISSN is used throughout the supply chain in e-commerce. It's used in ERMS. It can match and dedupe files that are from disparate sources. And emerging uses that I'll talk about later are use in archives. And then there's that future vision of the linked data environment where identifiers will be key. So I'm having trouble getting to my next slide, but there it is. So ISSN is very much about linking. And OpenURL is one very important use of ISSN and its linking capabilities. OpenURL can either use the plain vanilla ISSN or the linking ISSN, and I'm going to explain further about the linking ISSN in slides to follow. ISSN is also about interoperability. So here we can see that ISSN can interoperate with DOI, with EAN, which is the European counterpart of the UPC, that's the barcode, with OpenURL, and really facilitates this interoperability between different systems. And we love to collaborate with various projects and various standards that all work towards making the serials world work better, and this is that PyJ group that Cindy mentioned. And again, the future. ISSN is very well equipped to meet a future linking data environment. But let's take a little closer look at the ISSN. The definition in the standard, the international standard that ISSN is based on, which is ISO 3297, it's an 8-digit number. It includes a check digit. It's preceded by the prefix ISSN, and it is assigned to a continuing resource. And note that scope. We've gone beyond serials to continuing resources. and assigned by the ISSN network. ISSN consists of that prefix, the digits, and the check digits, but it is a dumb number. You cannot look at an ISSN and tell anything about it, unlike the ISBN, which can tell you a country or a publisher prefix. ISSN move around. We know that serials can move from country to country. So when it was developed, there was deliberately no country intelligence or publisher intelligence built in. That check digit guards against transcription errors, and it's based on a modulus 11, which is a mathematical calculation where you can have a remainder up to 10. But when you have the remainder of 10, in order to keep the number of digits in the ISSN to 8, the 10 remainder becomes a Roman numeral X. And sometimes publishers get a little wary of what does that X mean. They think it might mean that they're getting a lower class ISSN or something. But I point out that, Time Magazine has an X as its last digit, so that they're in good company. And the blocks of ISSN are allocated by our International Center in Paris to the ISSN Center, and when we run out of one block, we apply to another block that will not be consecutive with our previous block because other centers have gotten blocks intervening. So we can't even really always identify which ISSN originated with the U.S. The scope of ISSN has become increasingly broad over the years, and as opposed to originally being limited to serial publication, ISSN now does identify any ongoing integrating resources, such as the ULRICS web directory online. It also can identify both current publications, like the LC Information Bulletin, or long-dead publications, like the Journal de Savane, which was one of the first journals ever published in the modern world. And recently, as recent as a month ago, at the ISSN Directors Meeting held in Sarajevo, the directors agreed that ISSN can apply to versions that are designated to be read on mobile devices, such as smartphones and e-readers. But ISSN cannot do everything, SuperNumber as that it is, and so there are various things that it is not. And it does not confer any copyright or any trademark privileges. It is not the same as cataloging and publication. In fact, serials are not eligible for CIP. Even though we work with the Postal Service, having an ISSN does not allow lower rates for mailing. People have to go through and be approved for a permit that has its own criteria. And sometimes I'm very sorry to have to tell people that, because it's a popular misconception that I think gets us more ISSN applications. It is not an ISBN, although it is possible for one resource to have both an ISBN and an ISSN, such is the case of a monographic series, where the monograph will have the ISBN and the series will be identified by an ISSN, or even an annual directory, where the annual 2011 version will have an ISBN and the ongoing resource can also be identified by an ISSN. It is not the same as a DOI, Digital Object Identifier, although it can be embedded in the DOI as part of the suffix. And it is not the same as the LC control number or the BIPAD number, which is a number that newsstand and other trade publications can get that is embedded in the UPC, the Universal Product Barcode that is used in the United States. So there are certain things it is not. ISSN has a variety of users and uses, and just a quick look shows magazine distributors, subscription agents, postal service, those who are digitizing serials, barcoding agencies, of course publishers, our largest customer, knowledge bases, libraries, archives. The list continues to grow. And interestingly, our magazine distributors and our subscription agencies were very influential in retaining the separate ISSN for the different medium versions when the ISSN standard was revised in the early 2000s. Now there's also sometimes confusion between ISSN and ISBN, especially in the United States, where the Library of Congress hosts the US ISSN Center, but a private company, Bowker, hosts the ISBN agency. And this is a different pattern from what is found in many countries around the world, where a lot of our European colleagues are national libraries, such as the National Library in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where the ISSN Directors Meeting was recently held. They host both the ISSN agency, the ISBN agency, and the ISMN agency, the International Standard Music Number. And those three standards are often maintained by agencies in the national libraries. ISSN differs from ISBN in some very significant ways. For example, ISSN are assigned individually by ISSN centers, one by one, because we create a metadata record in these ISSN centers that follows library rules, basically ISBD. And they all are, the records go into a central ISSN register maintained at the International ISSN Center in Paris, whereas ISBN are allocated in blocks to publishers who get a prefix unique to that publisher, and then that publisher assigns the individual ISBN. While in the US, they do need to provide metadata to books in print, there is no central international ISBN metadata registry, and the metadata is not based on library rules. ISSN has a granularity about it by which separate ISSN are assigned to the different media versions, but at a somewhat higher level of granularity, such as there's an ISSN for the print version, but that same ISSN would be used for a large print and a regular print version. A CD version would have the same ISSN as the DVD version, and for onlines, an HTML, a PDF, and a variety of other online types would all be covered by one ISSN for the online version. When the ISSN standard 3297 was revised in, I should say, perhaps more the mid-2000s, resulting in the new standard published in 2007, a new flavor of ISSN resulted called the ISSN-L, or linking ISSN. So the original classic flavor, if you will, classic vanilla ISSN, is medium specific, as I just explained. But in order to collocate, in order to group or refer to that resource, regardless of its medium, the medium neutral ISSN, or ISSN-L, was developed. Another thing about the ISSN is that they do change under certain circumstances. So new ISSN is required when there is a major change of title as defined in the ISSN Manual, ISBD, and AACR2. A change in format also, such as when a print ceases and an online begins, also results in a new ISSN. But no new ISSN will happen when we have a change of publisher, a change of country, when the numbering begins again with 1, or when there is a minor change in title as defined by the 3 standards that were harmonized in 2002-2003. ISSN come from Paris, and it would be my great pleasure to have to go to Paris every time we ran out of a block of ISSN and bring home in a locked satchel our new group of ISSN. But in fact, we get the block via email. There are 87 ISSN centers around the world with a headquarters in Paris. And the US ISSN Center, as I mentioned, is located at the Library of Congress. Our responsibilities are many and varied. We assign ISSN to our nation's continuing resources. We provide these services to publishers and many other kinds of users that I mentioned. We maintain our National Register of ISSN metadata, which is really part of the CONSER database that is located in OCLC WorldCat. We contribute our metadata weekly to the International ISSN Register via an FTP load that is made weekly. We cooperate with our colleagues around the world to assign that ISSN and linking ISSN because they're in the global publishing environment. It increasingly happens that determining which ISSN centers should be responsible can be somewhat problematic. For example, we have multinational publishers that have an imprint in London, in Paris, in Sydney, in Berlin. And so for these large multinational publishers, there is a list that the centers have agreed on of who should be responsible, regardless of the first place listed on the publication. Absent being a participant in that list, we do go by the first place listed on the publication, but on a lot of online publications we're seeing that there is no place listed. And we sometimes contact the publisher, well, what is your place of publication? And they might tell us, oh, cyberspace, which doesn't yet have an ISSN center. So there's got to be communication and cooperation among the ISSN centers to make these determinations. And we're very happy to have email because in the early days we used telegrams and telexes that certainly were a lot more cumbersome. We communicate with publishers about the ISSN, about when they need a new one, about how many they might need. We promote the use and the good, accurate use of ISSN by such mechanisms as the PIJ best practices that we're working on and by the future update of the ISO 8 standard. And again, those are helping to develop the ISSN systems and their standards. This is the website, the front page of the US ISSN Center site with a lot of useful information, and we're always on the lookout for ways to improve it. And a little diagram of our relationships, only some of them. But as I mentioned, we have other ISSN centers, our publishers, our International Center in Paris, which we are in very continual email communication. As far as the Library of Congress, the US ISSN Center assigns ISSN to those publications collected by the library and will be very instrumental in getting ISSN for our digital repository, which is in the developing stages. We take requests from our consular libraries for U.S. publications. We have this arrangement with the Postal Service whereby they send us applications for new publications that apply for permits, postal rate permits. And we have a very unique partnership with ProQuest right now, most closely via their Serial Solutions group in Seattle. For the past 10 years, this partnership has resulted in a Bowker or ProQuest employee at the Library of Congress. Right now sits right outside my office. Eric Bergstrom is the current incumbent who works for both organizations, assigning ISSN, straightening out questions in both databases, and really helping to ensure good use of ISSN for both organizations. In the digital environment, the ISSN has increasing uses, and one of the most satisfying and noticeable uses of the ISSN has been in OpenURL, and for which the linking ISSN was specifically developed when the ISSN standard was updated and published in 2007. The reason being, when OpenURL first came to the fore, the target might have the print ISSN and the source might have the online ISSN or vice versa, and the links were failing. So when NISO sought its membership's input on whether the existing ISSN standard needed revision, it was up for its review, there was a great chorus of voices saying, yes, things are not working well, we need something. So the Linking ISSN was born out of a great deal of international negotiation among the various user communities of the ISSN. Because as I had mentioned, those that looked at the ISSN as a product identifier were very sure that they still needed to differentiate among the different media forms. Those that looked to the ISSN to identify content regardless of medium wanted only one ISSN. And the working group revising the standard went round and round trying to find a solution that would allow the best of both worlds. And the Linking ISSN was that solution. It is a mechanism that provides to collocate or link among the various media versions. It is the first ISSN assigned to any version, so it cannot be predicted. Even if we assign the ISSN to the print first and the online second, just in sequence here at the US ISSN Center, we cannot guarantee the order in which these records will be processed when they enter the ISSN register in Paris, and that is when there is an automated program that designates the first one into that system as the Linking ISSN. But I will be illustrating in a future slide how ISSN-L can be obtained and identified. Two new subfields were developed in the MARC 21 format to hold the Linking ISSN. The subfield L in the ISSN field 022 holds the Linking ISSN, and the subfield M holds any canceled Linking ISSN. And here's an illustration that shows that we have a print version with one ISSN, a CD with a different ISSN. This one starts with a 4, not a 1. An online version with yet another ISSN starts with an 8, but in this case, the first record that got into the ISSN register was the print. Therefore, that ISSN-L is based on the print ISSN, and it is the same for all the medium versions. We can see in a MARC record that the medium-specific ISSN for, in this case, the online version of the Journal of Adhesion is in the 022 subfield A, while the Linking ISSN, starting 0021, is in the subfield L. We can also look at the 776 links on this record and see the specific ISSN of the CD-ROM version and the ISSN of the print version, which in turn matches the ISSN-L. The designation of the ISSN-L that is done in Paris is based on the 776 links in the record, and that cluster all get the same ISSN-L. Now, how does ISSN work with OpenURL? Well, to begin with, OpenURL helps to ensure that the user who is perhaps working from a citation from an abstracting indexing database or some other source can get to the resource, and the appropriate copy of that resource that is the one paid for and accessible by their specific institution. And so the ISSN is one of the hidden powers behind the OpenURL, because the string that you see at the bottom uses that ISSN 0022-3514 to identify the title of the resource, and then the further information is the page and date and other data about that article. So ISSN is sort of a behind-the-scenes power behind OpenURL. ISSN-L are described in further detail on ISSN.org page and allows the download of ISSN-L tables free of charge. These are updated quarterly and really consist of tables. They don't look like this. This is my visualization because they're not very eye-readable. But you get a table that will show the ISSN, the medium-specific ISSN, and the appropriate ISSN-L, and another table that gives the reverse and shows the ISSN-L and all the cluster of specific ISSN that ISSN-L collocates. Where has ISSN-L been implemented? Well, some prominent examples are in WorldCat, where we see in the 022 field the ISSN-L. Here it's for the online American Journal of Agriculture Economics, and that would show you the subfield L. We can also see that ISSN-L has been implemented by the National Library of Medicine in Medline citations. They're showing us the print and the linking ISSN. And here's a lovely example of ISSN use where we see specifically identified a print ISSN, an electronic ISSN, and a linking ISSN for this particular journal. Another very good use of the ISSN, something of the poster child for why the ISSN-L is very useful, is in what used to be the PEPPERS registry service, which some of you may have heard about. It's located over in Scotland, and it is a registry of e-journals preservation. And it is started out getting reports of who was preserving what from all kinds of institutions in the UK. And some were supplying a print ISSN, and some were supplying an e-ISSN. And the folks at this registry, now called the Keepers Registry, realized that by using the linking ISSN, by using the ISSN register, which is their base, knowledge base, that they could ingest these different data that use different ISSN and yet know the appropriate resource that was being identified. ISSN is an enabler of interoperability, as well as being interoperable. So we can see in this that we've got an open URL, and in this particular instance it's showing the ISSN-L, but it could just as easily show a plain ISSN, a DOI, which can have an ISSN embedded as a suffix component, and how the ISSN is part of EAN barcodes. Here we see a French serial that embeds the 7 digits minus the check digit into the string that forms the barcode for this French serial. The reason the last digit of the ISSN is omitted is the whole EAN string has its own check digit at the end. ISSN is a component of several different barcodes. The UPC code in the United States, in fact, does not use the ISSN. That's our supermarket barcode, and I can sort of am of two minds as to whether that's a good thing or not. On the one hand, it would be good to have another use of the ISSN. On the other hand, the already busy US ISSN Center would be getting requests for many more crossword puzzle books, many more newsstand tabloids, etc., that use the UPC code. But the counterpart does use, the EAN 13 does use the ISSN, and I hear tales of woe from my colleagues in places like France, where they've had to assign an ISSN to a bread bag that somehow was involved in a cereal. Of course, we've done our own famous t-shirt way back when. And the SISAC barcode and symbol does use the ISSN. Now moving on to the products and services of the ISSN International Center, ISSN can be available as data files. ISSN is mostly, the most prominent product is the ISSN portal, which I'll show in a minute. We also have a list of abbreviations and a new OAI PMH service. By far, the most prominent is the portal, and there are now, or were in May, almost 1.6 million ISSN and records from all over the world in this product. It is especially strong on ISSN from our French ISSN Center, which typically will assign an ISSN to every title and former title going back to the very first title of any serial. So they're very thorough and very diligent with their coverage. There is increasingly good coverage from our Japan Center, our China ISSN Center, India, South American countries. So the ISSN portal is a truly international database of ISSN and records from our 88 ISSN centers throughout the world. The OAI PMH service is an exciting new service that can provide a more selective and a push service rather than the user having to go look things up. So, for example, it's a subscription service that will allow external applications to regularly and automatically gather metadata. The user, the subscriber, can set up the service for daily, weekly, or monthly updates, and my hope, perhaps dream, is that this could allow for regular knowledge base updates with selected information so that all those knowledge bases that underlie open URL resolvers that form the basis for citation services, for abstracting and indexing services, could synchronize their data, their updates, their accuracy by means of subscription to this authoritative database of ISSN information. It would be a dream come true for ISSN accuracy. We have a lot of collaborations, and I used the PyJ logo, emphasized a little bit by a Superman behind it, as an example. Now, the goal of PyJ is to connect users to content, which is really a goal that underlies ISSN use and standards all over. But PyJ is trying to put our best practices in very positive terms, but for illustration in this presentation, I decided it was a little more dramatic to show what we're asking publishers not to do. We're asking publishers to not confuse this poor student who has a term paper due tomorrow by hiding an article published under a former name under that current name. All she can find in the index of what is covered is the current name of the journal. By avoiding inaccurate citations which will cite an article under the current title of a journal despite the fact that it was published under an earlier title. By avoiding incorrect ISSN use, we will send the ISSN police to tell them, please correct your ISSN. In reality, the US ISSN Center has a form letter that we do send to any publishers that we notice printing incorrect ISSN. And we want to tell publishers using PyJ to avoid ignoring title changes. Why would you want to ignore the change of title in this lovely couple any more than ignoring change of title on a current journal? So more information about PyJ can be found at this URL, which is the workroom for the PyJ best practices. And we are hoping, cross our fingers, Cindy, myself, and the other working group members, to have early in 2012, if not late in 2011, a draft of our best practices out for general review, and we will certainly broadcast that availability through the appropriate lists. Another use of the ISSN that's emerging is its use in archiving. As more and more organizations come to realize that they need to preserve digital content that might be in danger of disappearing, as well as print content that might be in danger of disappearing because libraries are increasingly moving their print either to off-site storage or getting rid of it altogether. These archiving projects are being instituted. So identifiers are needed there as in any database or repository project. ISSN will be needed for digitized versions of long-dead serials, those that go well before ISSN got its start in the 70s. Identification of print serials that are sent to off-site. We've already received inquiries from CRL's print project paper, PAPR, and have begun very initial discussions of how we could provide ISSN for HathiTrust titles, perhaps beginning with those U.S. HathiTrust titles that are in the public domain. And here's the hot news straight from our ISSN meeting in Sarajevo, where a decision was made finally about ISSN use for digital reproductions. The discussions have gone on for a couple of years, and the conclusion that was agreed to was that all remotely accessed digital versions of the same resource will share that same, quote, e-ISSN, including any digitized reproductions. The basic principle, if it's delivered in a remote digital fashion, it's covered by the e-ISSN. And so how will that work? Well, here we have a print version with ISSN 1234567X. All the E versions will have that same ISSN 78787879. By the way, these are all made up ISSN and may not compute. The E versions will include a current E version from the current publisher, JSTOR backfile, and this does represent a change from the current practice. And how we will implement that change is still being discussed and developed. But in principle, JSTOR, at least from the implementation date forward, will now use an ISSN for the print, and their digitized version will carry the ISSN, same one as the current E version. Also, an iPad version, a Kindle version, a smartphone version, a version for the Color Nook, HathiTrust version, they will all be encompassed by this one ISSN assigned to the online version. The Keepers Registry will also be involved in that any digital reproductions will now use that e-ISSN. And as we can see here, the project that formerly was called Peppers is now released to the public as a beta version. I will provide the URL along with a list of other URLs at the end. But it's a really interesting project whose aim is to discover who is looking after what e-journals, to avoid duplication of effort, to allow different organizations to choose what they will digitize and preserve, perhaps based on the fact that no one else is looking for it. And it is a partnership between the ISSN International Center and EDINA, which is based at Scottish University. The ISSN-L, as I mentioned before, is also hiding behind the scenes and helping to make all this work. Library of Congress has an e-deposit project that is evolving, and I talked to the project manager, Ted Westervelt, about ISSN use there, and he considered it to be that key match point where future automated matching of incoming material is going to be very much involved with matching on the ISSN to make sure that the automated process is matching up the expected material with the incoming material. So, to sum up, ISSN, which used to be mostly about the present and the future, we'd assign ISSN to pre-publication titles, things that were yet to be published, is now reaching back into the past as well. It's reaching back to assign ISSN to all those long dead serials that are getting a new life in that digital environment. But at the same time, as all those past titles, we will still have all those future titles to identify. So I'm definitely not worried about running out of work in the US ISSN Center or worried about running out of work internationally. And I might add, I'm not even worried at this point about running out of ISSN because we've only used not even the second million out of our total of 9,999,999. And even though that day will come, I think by then we'll have some future system in place. I want to conclude with a quote that is one of my favorite quotations from Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote 2001 Space Odyssey. He says that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And this quote always brings to mind a picture of the Wizard of Oz, that wizard hiding behind the curtain, pulling those technological levers and pulleys. It looked like magic to Dorothy and the Scarecrow and the other folks in the Wizard of Oz. But really, it was an advanced technology for the time. And so I envision that behind the future advanced technology of the future linked data environment that will allow connections between journals, author registries, articles, former and later titles, different media versions, different archives and subscriptions, and all these beautiful mix-up, mash-ups, and links that the future may enable. Behind that magical technology will be lurking very many identifiers, among which will be ISSN SuperNumber. So for further information, here are some links about the US ISSN Center, the International Center, NISO's PyJ Working Group page, and the Keepers Registry, and my email address, and I certainly always welcome people contacting me with ISSN questions. And speaking of questions, I'm going to now turn it over to Cindy, who will monitor and read the questions.
Okay, we've got two, and the first one, I know you've gone over this, but it's kind of hard to get your head around. So Regina, what's the difference between the eISSN and ISSN-L?
Very good question. And I'll first start out by saying, officially speaking, there is no such thing as an eISSN, which is why I try to put it in quotation marks anytime I use it. Basically, what publishers call eISSN is really the medium-specific ISSN that is assigned to the online version. So for medium-specific ISSN, plain vanilla ISSN, the ISSN that was first developed in the 70s and that got expanded in the 80s, it's just any old ISSN.
Okay, and ISSN-L? the difference between the EISSN and ISSN-L. Regina, are you hearing me? We seem to have lost Regina's audio. Well, unless we can get her back within the next couple of minutes, what we will do is let you go ahead and keep sending in questions. We do have a log of the questions, and we will provide that to Regina, and she'll answer them, send us her responses, and we will send them out to all of you. Yeah, Jackie, go ahead and change me to being the presenter, and we'll go through the closing, but if we can get Regina back, we'll do some questions. So don't go away yet. We'll hope Regina does get back. I want to thank Regina for presenting substantial material on an important information resource topic in her usual fun way. We appreciate the hard work she put into this presentation. The ALCTS Continuing Education Committee hopes that you found today's session about the ISSN both useful and enjoyable to watch. Attendees will soon receive a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond to it. Your comments are valued by the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee. We consider what you tell us when we plan new continuing education offerings. 3 additional webinars are slated for presentation during the remainder of 2011, and a new series of webinars are being developed for spring 2012. So please check the ALCTS homepage frequently for updates. On the screen now you can see the webinars that are slated for November 30th, December 7th, and December 15th. If you would like to propose a webinar or suggest a topic and a speaker, please use the link to the form indicated on your screen or contact our Continuing Education Committee Chair, Pamela Blue, whose email message also appears on the screen, or her email address, sorry. Regina, are you back? Regina, are you back? And I can see her, but I still can't hear her. So with apologies for ending a little bit early, I'm going to sign off. But before I do, I would like to thank Jackie Samples for providing technical support for today's webinar. The support that Jackie and the CE Committee Technical Support Subcommittee provide make it possible for ALCTS to present its webinars. We are very grateful to all of those volunteers. Thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon. We hope you will participate in other ALCTS continuing education events in the future.